The Wyoming plains stretched endlessly under a wide sky, pale blue at the edges and burning gold near the sinking sun. Wind came rolling in steady waves, bending the grass, rattling the dry bones of last summer's sagebrush. Luke Mathers leaned on his fence, the wood rough under his calloused hands. He had built that fence with his own back and sweat, but today it was just something to lean on while the silence pressed in too close. 5 years without his wife had hollowed out a part of him he'd never managed to fill again. The cattle grazed slow in the distance, their shapes small against the empty horizon. Luke's old dog, Rusty, sat at his feet, nose twitching. The only other sound was the wind whistling between fence rails. He was thinking about supper, or the lack of it, when the thought struck him. He was down to his last sack of flour and near out of coffee. Supplies meant going into town. He didn't much care for the chatter of other folks, but he couldn't live on wind and regret. By the time he saddled up his truck, an old flatbed Ford with the paint baked pale by the sun, the sky had begun to take on that amber hue that promised nightfall in an hour. The drive was quiet, the road a ribbon of dust. He passed only a few riders headed back to their own spreads, each nodding without slowing. The land out here was too big for lingering talk. The general store sat at the far end of the boardwalk in town, its windows clouded from years of sun and dust. Luke pushed open the door, the bell above it giving a tired jangle. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of flour, coffee beans, and oiled leather. Wooden floors creaked under his boots as he made for the counter. That's when he noticed her. She stood in the corner near the dry goods, a faded blue dress hanging loose on her frame. Dust clung to the hem. Her hair was pinned back, but stray strands had escaped and curled against her neck. Luke wouldn't have looked twice, except for the way she moved, slow, deliberate, like each gesture had to be thought through before it happened. She reached for a bag of coffee, but her fingers shook. That's when he saw the faint discoloration around her wrists. Not the fresh purple of a new bruise, but the yellowed shade of one almost healed. There was a cut on her cheekbone, just at the edge of where the hair covered. Luke froze with a can of beans in his hand, watching her. She noticed him looking and flinched, her gaze darting toward the shelves like she'd been caught doing something wrong. "You all right, ma'am?" His voice came out low and even, but softer than most had ever heard it. "I'm fine," she said quickly, but the second word caught in her throat, breaking apart like thin ice under a boot. Luke didn't press, but he didn't turn away either. Folks in these parts believed in leaving each other's troubles alone, but his gut told him this wasn't something to leave be. When she went to pay, her coins slipped in her fingers, clinking onto the counter. The storekeeper's son, a man in his late 20s with the build of someone used to getting his way, picked them up slow, his smirk just shy of mocking. She thanked him barely above a whisper, gathered her purchase, and walked out. Luke counted off his own goods, paid in silence, and stepped onto the porch. She was standing at the far end, her back to him, clutching her parcel to her chest. He started toward her, his boots thudding on the boards. "Where you headed?" he asked, keeping his tone light, like it was the most ordinary question in the world. Her shoulders stiffened. She glanced toward the dusty road, then back at the store, as though weighing which direction held less danger. "Away from here," she murmured. "As far as I can get." Something in the way she said it, no drama, no pleading, just a statement of quiet desperation, set Luke's teeth on edge. He didn't get the chance to answer. The storekeeper's son stepped outside, his eyes narrowing when he saw her. He didn't raise his voice, but the words came sharp enough to cut. "You best get back where you belong." Luke caught the subtle recoil in her posture, the way her grip tightened on the paper parcel until the bag crinkled. That was no casual warning, that was a man speaking to someone he thought he owned. She backed up a step, her voice trembling but defiant. "No more pain," she said, meeting the man's eyes. "My ribs are already broken." The words hit Luke like a hammer to the chest. They were quiet, but in the stillness of the porch, they carried. His gaze flicked to the man, then back to her. Luke wasn't a lawman, and he had no interest in starting a fight he didn't have to finish, but there was something in the set of her jaw, the mix of fear and stubborn dignity, that made walking away impossible. He stepped forward, placing himself square between her and the man on the porch. "Seems to me," Luke said, his voice dropping into a calm that was more dangerous than shouting, "the lady's already told you she's leaving." The other man's eyes narrowed, the hint of a challenge in them. But Luke didn't budge. He'd built a life out here plank by plank, fence post by fence post, and he'd stood against enough winter storms to know that sometimes you didn't back down, no matter what was coming. In that moment, with the light of the setting sun painting the street in fire and shadow, Luke Mathers made a choice, one that would put him at odds with more than just one man. One that would make half the county see him as a troublemaker. But to him, it was simple. No one was going to touch her again. Not while he still drew breath. Night had already spread its heavy cloak over the plains by the time Luke and the woman reached his ranch. The ride back had been quiet, the only sound the steady growl of his old truck in the wind pushing against the cab. She sat beside him, pressed to the door as if the extra inch of space might protect her. Her hands never left the parcel in her lap, though Luke suspected the coffee and flour inside meant less to her than the fact she was out of town and away from him, the man she'd spoken of with that low, flat dread. When he stopped in front of the house, Rusty came trotting from the barn, tail wagging, barking once before sniffing at the stranger. She gave the dog a tentative smile, the first soft thing he'd seen in her since the store. "You can stay in the guest room," Luke said, nodding toward the porch. "It ain't much, but it's warm, and no one will bother you here." She hesitated at the door, eyes darting over the shadowy yard. "He'll come," she murmured, almost to herself. "They always come." Luke met her gaze, steady and unblinking. "Then he'll find I'm not much for giving folks what they want." Inside, the fire in the stove had burned down to glowing embers, but it was enough to warm the air. She stood near it, rubbing her arms as if shaking off more than the night chill. Luke made coffee, pouring it into mismatched mugs, and slid one across the table to her. She wrapped her hands around it without drinking. "My name's Clara," she said quietly. "He wasn't my husband, just a man who thought he could own me." Luke didn't press for more. She would tell the rest when she was ready. Or not at all. Out here, silence could be as much a gift as words. It wasn't long before trouble came. The first sign was Rusty's low growl from the porch. Luke stepped outside, the night so still that the crunch of tires on dirt carried clear from the road. Headlights flared, cutting across the yard, and a black truck rolled in, the engine rumbling like an animal ready to strike. The storekeeper's son stepped out, another man climbing out from the passenger side, bigger, broader, with the kind of posture that meant he'd done ugly work before. "Evening, Mathers," the son called, his tone falsely pleasant. "Heard you've got something that belongs to me." Luke leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. "Don't reckon you own people, Miller. Law says otherwise." Miller's smile was thin. "Law don't matter much out here when a man's got friends. And I've got plenty." Luke could feel Clara's eyes on him from the doorway. She didn't speak, but the tension in the air was a living thing. "You're gonna hand her over," Miller continued, "and we'll all pretend this little detour never happened." Luke's reply was calm, but there was iron under it. "She's not going anywhere with you. And if you think stepping onto my land to take her is a good idea, you'd best think twice." The bigger man took a step forward, fists flexing. "We're not here to think, cowboy." Luke's hand rested near the rifle leaning against the porch rail. He didn't raise it, not yet, but the message was plain. "You've got 10 seconds to turn that truck around." For a moment, the only sounds were the creak of cooling metal and the wind skimming over the grass. Then Miller spat into the dirt, eyes hard. "This ain't over, Mathers." They left, tires spitting gravel, but Luke knew it was a retreat, not surrender. Men like that didn't quit because they were told to. They came back, meaner. Back inside, Clara stood stiff, her mug untouched. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "They'll come back with more men. No one stands up to them." "I just did," Luke answered simply. For the next 2 days, Luke worked the ranch as usual, but his rifle stayed closer than usual, and Rusty's ears pricked at every sound. Clara kept to the house, helping with chores when she thought he wasn't watching. There was a steadiness in her hands now, like the act of being somewhere safe was slowly rethreading her together. On the third night, the storm broke. It started with the thud of boots in the yard. Luke was at the table cleaning his rifle when the sound came, and Clara froze, a plate in her hands. Then voices, 4, maybe 5 men. Miller among them. Luke opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Lantern light from their hands caught the wet gleam of the earth after a brief rain. Miller stood at the front, a shotgun slung loose in his grip. "Last chance, Mathers," he called. "Hand her over, and we'll let you keep your fences standing." Luke didn't answer with words. He fired a single shot into the dirt, close enough to Miller's boot that the man stumbled back, swearing. "Next one won't miss," Luke said. The air crackled with tension. One of the men raised his rifle, but Rusty's sudden barking from the shadows drew his aim off. Luke took the moment, stepping down from the porch, eyes sweeping the group. You boys want to see which of us is still standing by sunup, go ahead and try. But you'd best be ready to lose more than you came for. For a long beat, no one moved. Then, one by one, the men backed away, muttering. Miller's glare lingered longest, but even he knew when a fight wasn't worth the cost. They left in the same roar of engines as before, swallowed by the night. Inside, Clara's breath came fast, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Why, she asked, why would you risk all this for me? Luke shrugged, though his jaw was tight. Because no one else would. And because out here, if you let men like that win once, they don't ever stop. Her eyes softened, though the fear hadn't fully gone. I don't know how to repay you. You just did, Luke said, nodding to where she stood, not hiding, not shrinking, just looking him in the eye. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the porch rail. But in the warm glow of the kitchen, with the smell of wood smoke in the air, the threat felt farther away. For the first time in a long while, Luke Mathers wasn't thinking about how empty the ranch felt. And Clara, though she didn't say it, wasn't thinking about running. It wasn't the end of trouble. Not by a long shot. But it was the beginning of something else. Something that, for both of them, might just be worth the fight.